Michael didn't yell when he said it. He didn't even pause the show he was watching. "I can't keep pretending," he murmured, eyes still on the screen. "Your sister is the one I really want." 10 years of marriage ended with that sentence, quiet, casual, like he was talking about switching coffee brands instead of breaking someone's heart. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. The room felt too small, too still, like the air had been sucked out. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out strangely calm. "Then you should go be with her," I said. He finally looked at me, confused, almost disappointed that I wasn't crying or begging. Maybe he expected a scene, something dramatic that would make him feel justified. Instead, I just stood there, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Jennifer had always been the easy choice for people. My younger sister, the fitness influencer with the effortless smile and the life that looked perfect through a camera lens. She posted sunlit workout videos while I worked late shifts, saving money for fertility treatments Michael swore he wanted too. I remembered the way he used to double-tap her photos without thinking. I used to tell myself it meant nothing. Now I know better. "Do you even love me?" he asked suddenly, like my calmness offended him. "I do," I said honestly. "But love isn't enough if you're already somewhere else." He stared at me for a long moment, searching for a crack in my composure. When he didn't find one, he grabbed his keys and left to meet Jennifer at a photo shoot across town. The silence after the door closed felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. What Michael didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I had already bought a pregnancy test that morning. It sat hidden in the bathroom drawer, waiting for his birthday surprise. I took it alone. 2 pink lines appeared almost immediately. I remember laughing and crying at the same time, sitting on the bathroom floor while the reality of everything crashed into me. I had imagined handing him the news wrapped in a little box, watching his face light up. Instead, I slid the test back into the drawer and locked the door. He came back the next morning smelling like Jennifer's perfume. There was a faint smear of lipstick near his collarbone he didn't bother to hide. He packed his clothes quietly, like a guest checking out of a hotel instead of a husband leaving a marriage. We slept in separate rooms that night, though neither of us really slept. My mom called less than a day later, her voice bright and excited. "Did you hear? Michael and Jennifer finally admitted their feelings. Isn't that something?" Something. That was one word for it. She spoke like it was a romantic plot twist instead of a betrayal. Like my 10 years of marriage were just a prelude to their happy ending. I almost told her about the baby. Almost said the words out loud just to remind someone that my life mattered too. But the thought of everyone turning it into another family drama made my throat close. So I hung up and sat in silence instead. 3 weeks later, the stress caught up with me. The doctor used careful words. "Complications, not uncommon, nothing you could have done differently." But grief doesn't listen to medical explanations. Losing the baby felt like the final thread snapping. After that, I stopped making plans. I drove around aimlessly, trying to outrun memories that seemed to live in every corner of the city. That's when I saw the sign taped crookedly to a glass door. "Fitness center hiring, cleaning crew. No experience needed." I don't know why I parked. Maybe because it was something simple. Something that didn't require me to explain my past or my heartbreak. The woman behind the front desk, a retired bodybuilder with silver hair and sharp eyes, handed me a mop and said, "Start with the mirrors. They tell you more about people than you think." I didn't realize it then, but that moment was the first step toward rebuilding a life that had nothing to do with Michael, Jennifer, or anyone else's expectations. Because a year later, the same man who walked out so easily would stand in a crowded room begging me not to leave him behind. And by then, I wouldn't even recognize the woman I used to be. What I didn't know yet was that sweeping those fitness center floors would lead me straight toward the strongest and most unexpected version of myself. The first few weeks at the fitness center felt strange, like I was living someone else's life. I wasn't a member. I wasn't a trainer. I was just the woman wiping down treadmills after closing, emptying trash cans, and pretending I didn't hear people laughing in the locker rooms. Most days I kept my head down, earbuds in, moving through the routine Olivia showed me, mirrors first, then weights, then the cardio machines. At night, when the last client left, the building became quiet in a way that felt safe. Olivia watched me without saying much. She was the kind of person who didn't waste words, but somehow noticed everything. One evening, while I was scrubbing a rack of dumbbells, she leaned against the wall and said, "You don't move like someone who plans to stay invisible forever." I laughed softly. "Trust me, I'm fine being invisible right now." She didn't argue. She just pointed toward the weight room. "Whenever you're ready," she said. "Barbells don't ask questions." At first, I only stayed a few extra minutes after my shift. I tried a few exercises awkwardly, copying movements I'd seen others do. The rhythm of lifting felt different from anything else in my life, simple, predictable. You pick something heavy up, you put it back down. No mixed signals. No betrayal. Meanwhile, Michael started texting again. His messages were always short, almost casual, like he wanted to slide back into normal conversation. "Hope you're okay. Saw you working out. Looks good." Sometimes he mentioned Jennifer indirectly, like he expected me to compare myself to her. I didn't respond. The silence between us grew louder than any argument we'd ever had. One afternoon, they both showed up at the apartment building while I was heading upstairs after a shift. Michael needed to grab the last few boxes he'd left behind. Jennifer leaned against the wall scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging me until she noticed my fitness center bag. "You're working out now?" she asked, her tone halfway between curiosity and amusement. "That's unexpected." I didn't take the bait. I walked past them, changed clothes, and stayed in my room until they left. The sound of their laughter in the hallway felt like a door closing on the person I used to be. The next morning, I showed up at the fitness center early and lifted harder than I ever had before. Weeks turned into months. The scales started moving, but more importantly, my confidence did too. Members began recognizing me, the quiet girl who was always there, always consistent. Some asked for tips. Others just nodded with respect. One day, Olivia called me into her tiny office. A stack of papers sat on the desk. "You've been putting in work," she said. "If you want to take this seriously, I'll cover your certification course." I blinked at her, unsure if I'd heard correctly. "Why would you do that?" "Because I invest in people who don't quit," she replied simply. Studying again felt strange after so long, but it gave my days structure. Within 11 months, I passed my personal training exam. My first paying client handed me $60 in cash at the end of our session and said, "I feel stronger already." I sat in my car afterward holding the money, realizing it was the first time in a long while that something in my life felt earned instead of given or taken away. A woman named Marianne started training with me twice a week. She was sharp, observant, and surprisingly encouraging. "You ever thought about opening your own fitness center?" she asked one day between sets. I laughed at the idea. "I'm barely getting my footing." She shrugged. "Everyone starts somewhere. And you've got something people trust." Around the same time, Michael messaged again after seeing a video of me coaching a class online. "You don't have to prove anything," he wrote. "Jennifer won't replace what we had." The words sat on my screen for a long time. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off my phone and drove across town with Marianne to look at an old, empty building she said had potential. The place smelled like dust and forgotten plans, but sunlight poured through the front windows in a way that made my chest feel lighter. Standing there, I realized something surprising. For the first time since everything fell apart, I wasn't thinking about Michael or Jennifer at all. I was thinking about the possibility. And just as that hope started to grow, an invitation arrived that threatened to pull me right back into the past. Michael and Jennifer's one-year anniversary party. I told myself I didn't need closure, but walking into that room would test whether I had really moved on. I almost didn't go to the anniversary party. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for days, staring at me every time I walked past. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, to prove I was done with that chapter of my life. But another part of me knew that avoiding it would feel like running away, and I was tired of feeling like the past still had power over me. So I went. Not alone. James picked me up just before sunset. Calm as always, he didn't ask a million questions or try to coach me on what to say. He simply opened the car door, waited until I settled into the seat, and gave me a small nod that said, "I'm here if you need me." We had been engaged quietly for 3 months. No big announcement, no dramatic posts online. Just two people building something steady together. The party was held at a rooftop venue downtown, all soft lights, expensive decorations, and people dressed like they were attending a wedding instead of a one-year anniversary. The moment we stepped out of the elevator, I felt every eye turn toward us. And then I saw Michael. He stood near the bar, mid-conversation, laughing at something someone said. The second his gaze landed on me, his expression changed completely. Surprise first. Then confusion. Then something deeper, regret, maybe. Jennifer stood beside him in a pale dress, one hand resting on her stomach. She looked different from the confident influencer I remembered. Tired. Tense. Like she was holding herself together for the cameras. "Ready?" asked quietly. I nodded, even though my heart was racing. We walked further into the room, and whispers followed us like shadows. Some people smiled politely. Others stared openly, waiting for drama. I focused on my breathing, slow in, slow out, the same rhythm I'd practiced in prenatal yoga. Dinner started without incident, small talk filling the air. I thought maybe the night would pass quietly. I was wrong. Halfway through dessert, Michael stood up and tapped his glass with a fork. The sound cut through the chatter instantly. "I need everyone's attention for a moment," he said, voice tight. Jennifer's face went pale before he even finished the sentence. He cleared his throat. "There's something I need to be honest about, something I should have said a long time ago." His eyes moved across the room until they landed on me. "I recently found out I'm infertile." Murmurs spread like wildfire. He continued, words rushing out faster now. "Which means the baby Jennifer is carrying isn't mine." The room fell into stunned silence. Jennifer looked like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. I felt a strange mix of shock and distance, like I was watching a movie instead of living in the moment. Then Michael turned fully toward me. "Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life," he said, stepping away from the table. "I thought I knew what I wanted, but I didn't. I want to fix things between us." He started walking closer, ignoring the gasps and whispers around us. My body reacted before my mind did. I took 3 slow steps backward, one hand instinctively resting on my own growing belly. James shifted forward slightly, not aggressive, just present enough to create space. "Michael," I said calmly, keeping my voice steady, "this isn't the place for that conversation." His eyes dropped to my stomach for the first time, realization flickering across his face. Confusion. Hurt. Maybe even hope. "We need to talk," he insisted quietly. "Any communication goes through text or email," I replied. "Public places only. Nothing private." It wasn't anger that filled his expression, it was disbelief. Like he couldn't understand why I wasn't reacting the way he expected. Around us, several guests were already holding up their phones, recording everything. The air felt heavy with judgment and curiosity. Jennifer moved closer to me near the doorway, mascara smudged under her eyes. "Can we just talk?" "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned toward the exit, focusing on the steady rhythm of my steps. James stayed beside me, matching my pace, his hand brushing mine just enough to remind me I wasn't alone. The elevator ride down felt endless. Once we reached the car, I finally exhaled the breath I'd been holding all night. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed calm as I started listing everything that had happened, every word, every reaction, so I could write it down later while it was still fresh. The drive home was quiet, filled only by the hum of the radio. I thought setting boundaries would end the chaos. But I had no idea that the real storm was just beginning. And it would arrive in the form of a thick legal envelope waiting in my mailbox. Because the next morning, Michael's next move wouldn't be emotional, it would be legal. The envelope was thicker than anything I'd ever received in the mail before. It sat in my mailbox like a warning sign, plain white, my name printed neatly in the corner, a law firm's return address stamped across the top. For a moment I just stared at it, keys still in my hand, trying to convince myself it was something harmless. It wasn't. I opened it at the kitchen counter while James made tea behind me. The words blurred together at first, legal language, timelines, references to marriage dates and financial claims. But one sentence stood out clearly. Michael may have a legal interest in the fitness center as marital property. My stomach dropped. The fitness center wasn't just a business. It was proof that I could rebuild my life from nothing. The idea of him claiming a piece of it felt like someone reaching into my future and trying to rewrite it. James didn't interrupt while I read. He just placed the mug beside me and waited. "Well," he asked gently when I finished. "He thinks he deserves part of the fitness center," I said, my voice steady even though my chest felt tight. Instead of spiraling, I forced myself into problem-solving mode. Panic wouldn't help. Documentation would. That afternoon I booked an appointment with a forensic accountant recommended by one of Marianne's contacts. His office downtown looked exactly how you'd imagine, stacks of files, a calculator on the desk, framed certifications covering the walls. Mr. Peterson flipped through my paperwork carefully. Bank statements. Loan agreements. The inheritance funds from my grandmother that covered the initial deposit. He circled dates with a red pen. "Everything here happened after you separated from Michael," he said finally. "That makes his claim weak. Not impossible, but weak." Relief didn't hit all at once. It came slowly, like the tension in my shoulders finally loosening. We spent 4 hours organizing timelines, when I started working at the first fitness center, when I signed my lease, when investors came on board. Every detail mattered now. On the drive back, my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Jennifer. Her message request sat unopened on the screen. "We need to talk." Woman to woman. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling old emotions try to creep back in. Anger. Hurt. Curiosity. Instead of replying, I took a screenshot for my records and locked my phone. Distance wasn't cruelty. It was protection. The next morning I added extra prenatal yoga classes to my schedule, partly for my health, partly to keep my mind focused on something other than legal battles. My team immediately offered to cover sessions if I needed rest, reminding me that I wasn't carrying everything alone anymore. Meanwhile, the fallout from the anniversary party kept spreading online. Clips of Michael's announcement surfaced on local pages, and people started tagging my fitness center in the comments like it was part of some reality show. Myrtle, who handled our social media, came into my office with her laptop and drafted a short statement. Professional. Neutral. Focused on wellness and privacy. We posted it across all platforms. Within hours, the speculation slowed down. Michael texted me later that night. "We need to meet." This isn't how our story ends. I copied the same boundary message I'd sent before, legal matters only, written communication only, and pressed send without adding anything else. It felt strange how calm I was. A year earlier, I would have over-explained, tried to soften the message, worried about how it sounded. Now, clarity felt stronger than kindness. A few days later, Jennifer sent another message, this time agreeing to mediation and a paternity test. That caught me off guard. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I researched professional mediators and found one who specialized in high-conflict family situations. I emailed both of them the details with clear rules, factual discussions only, no blame spirals, equal speaking time. Setting the structure felt like building a fence around chaos. But the stress wasn't gone. 2 mornings later, I woke up to light spotting and a wave of panic hit me so hard I could barely breathe. James drove me to the hospital while I tried to stay calm, repeating the breathing exercises I'd learned. The doctor reassured me everything looked normal, just stress. She recommended therapy and more rest. Hearing that made something click inside me. This wasn't just about protecting my business anymore. It was about protecting my health and my baby. When I got home, I looked at the legal envelope still sitting on the counter. Instead of fear, I felt determination. Because Michael might have started this battle with paperwork, but I was about to answer it with proof he couldn't argue against. And when we finally sat down for the first mediation session, Michael revealed a version of himself I had never seen, one that changed the tone of everything that came next. The mediator's office looked intentionally neutral. Beige walls, soft lighting, a round table instead of a desk. Nothing sharp, nothing personal. It felt less like a courtroom and more like a place designed to slow people down before they said something they couldn't take back. Michael was already there when I arrived. He stood when I walked in, smoothing the front of his jacket like he was preparing for a job interview. For a split second I saw the version of him I used to know, nervous energy, that familiar half-smile. But it disappeared the moment the mediator introduced the ground rules. Facts only. No interruptions. Equal speaking time. Jennifer sat quietly beside him, hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller than I remembered, her usual confidence replaced by exhaustion. I noticed the way she avoided my eyes, focusing instead on the papers in front of her. James had driven me to the appointment but stayed outside in the car, exactly as we'd agreed. His support felt steady even from a distance. Michael spoke first. He read from his phone, an apology that sounded practiced, probably shaped in therapy sessions. He admitted he had made impulsive decisions. He said he regretted how everything ended. For a moment, the room felt heavy with words that might have meant something a year earlier. Then his tone shifted. Without taking a breath, he started talking about finances, timelines, investments, the effort he had put into our life together. The conversation turned from emotional to transactional so quickly it gave me whiplash. I held up my hand gently. There won't be any reconciliation, I said, keeping my voice calm. And any discussion about assets needs to go through our lawyers, not this room. The mediator nodded and wrote something down. Michael's expression tightened, but he didn't argue. Jennifer finally spoke when the conversation turned to her pregnancy. Her voice shook slightly as she confirmed she had agreed to a paternity test and wanted the process handled professionally. She didn't offer excuses or explanations, just facts. That alone felt like a small shift from the chaos of the anniversary party. When the session ended, the mediator summarized everything we'd agreed on: no contact outside scheduled meetings, all legal communication in writing, and clear timelines for financial documentation. Walking back to the car afterward, I felt strangely lighter. Not because anything had been resolved yet, but because everything was finally structured. Predictable. The next few days were quieter than I expected. My fitness center hosted a charity fundraiser for a local women's shelter that weekend, and I stopped by briefly to thank everyone who showed up. Members formed an unspoken protective circle around me, steering conversations toward workouts and new classes whenever anyone tried to bring up the drama. One woman even changed the subject mid-question, launching into a discussion about protein shakes like it was the most fascinating topic in the world. I laughed more that night than I had in weeks. On Monday morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A reporter introduced herself from a local news station, asking for a comment about the anniversary party video that had started circulating online. I gave her 2 careful sentences about privacy and mental health, then ended the call before she could dig deeper. By the afternoon, my forensic accountant emailed an updated report breaking down every financial detail of the fitness center. Inheritance funds, business loans, dates that proved everything happened after my separation from Michael. Seeing it laid out so clearly felt like armor. Michael's lawyer sent a settlement proposal later that week suggesting I pay him for his emotional investment in my success. My accountant actually laughed out loud when she read it. We responded with documentation, tax returns, bank statements, incorporation records, showing there was nothing for him to claim. Jennifer sent me a brief message that evening thanking me for pushing mediation instead of letting everything explode into a public legal fight. I didn't reply, but I saved the message for my records. That night, James and I sat in the kitchen talking about the wedding plans we'd started months earlier. He admitted he worried people would always compare him to Michael, that he'd never fully step out of that shadow. We decided to slow things down. Not because we doubted each other, but because we wanted to build something calm, not rushed. The next morning I attended my first prenatal class at the hospital. A tiny instructor led us through breathing exercises, reminding us to advocate for ourselves and protect our peace. Her words stuck with me longer than I expected. Because mediation wasn't just about legal closure anymore. It was about learning how to stand firm without losing myself in the process. And just when I thought the sessions might stay predictable, Jennifer revealed a truth in the next meeting that changed the entire direction of everything. Because when Jennifer finally admitted who the real father was, the room shifted, and Michael's reaction said more than any apology ever could. The second mediation session felt heavier before it even started. I could sense it the moment I walked into the office, the air tighter, the silence thicker. Michael sat at the table with his hands clasped together, staring at a spot on the wall like he was trying to memorize it. Jennifer looked exhausted, her shoulders slightly hunched, fingers twisting the edge of a tissue. The mediator reviewed the ground rules again, her voice calm and steady. Facts. Respect. No interruptions. For a few minutes, the conversation stayed focused on logistics, timelines for financial disclosures, follow-ups from lawyers, scheduling updates. I almost believed this session would be as structured and uneventful as the last one. Then Jennifer cleared her throat. Her voice came out small at first. I need to say something before we go any further. Michael's eyes shifted toward her immediately, confusion flickering across his face. Jennifer took a deep breath, blinking rapidly like she was trying to keep herself together. The father of my baby isn't Michael, she said quietly. It's someone I worked with. A photographer named Edwin. The words landed in the room like a dropped weight. Michael didn't react right away. He just stared at her, expression blank, like his brain needed extra time to catch up with what he'd heard. The mediator nodded gently, writing notes while Jennifer explained that Edwin had already been informed and was willing to cooperate with testing and future discussions. There was no dramatic confession, no shouting. Just a tired honesty that felt more real than anything I'd seen from her before. For a moment, I felt oddly removed from it all. A year ago, this revelation would have shattered me. Now it felt like watching someone else's storm from a safe distance. Michael finally spoke, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Jennifer didn't answer directly. She just looked down at her hands, shoulders trembling slightly. The mediator stepped in before emotions could spiral, redirecting the conversation toward next steps, confirming paternity testing, outlining how communication with Edwin would be handled, and documenting everything for legal clarity. When the session ended, I walked out into the hallway feeling lighter than I expected. Not happy, just free. Like a knot I hadn't realized I was still carrying had finally loosened. Outside, James leaned against the car, waiting exactly where he said he would. He didn't ask for details right away. He simply handed me a bottle of water and waited until I started talking on my own. "She told the truth," I said softly as we drove away. And somehow, it didn't feel like a victory or a loss. Just closure. The next few days were quieter. Jennifer and Edwin began separate meetings with the mediator to discuss co-parenting plans. I heard through updates that he seemed calm, focused, even relieved to have structure around the situation instead of public chaos. Meanwhile, Michael's lawyer requested another round of financial documents, but my accountant assured me we were prepared for anything. Every bank statement, every contract, every timeline had been organized down to the smallest detail. Still, stress has a way of finding cracks. One morning, I woke up to light spotting again. The fear hit instantly. Sharp and overwhelming, even though I tried to stay calm. James drove me to the hospital while I focused on slow breaths, counting in and out like the prenatal instructor taught me. The doctor reassured me everything looked fine. The baby was strong. The spotting was likely stress-related, but she encouraged me to rest more and consider therapy focused on prenatal anxiety. Hearing the baby's heartbeat during the ultrasound felt like a reset button. That evening, I adjusted my schedule at the fitness center, adding more breaks and delegating classes to my team. Within minutes, messages poured in from staff offering to cover anything I needed. Their support reminded me that I wasn't carrying everything alone anymore. Jennifer messaged me later that week, thanking me for agreeing to mediation instead of pushing everything into court. I read the message, saved it for documentation, and left it unanswered. Not every peace offering needed a response. By the end of the week, the mediator sent an update confirming Edwin had scheduled his paternity test and agreed to cooperate fully moving forward. For the first time since the anniversary party, the chaos felt like it was settling into something manageable. But just when I thought the hardest truths had already been spoken, Michael made a move in the next session that changed the tone of everything again. Because the next time we sat at that round table, Michael didn't come with anger or demands, he came with a written statement that no one in the room expected to hear. The third mediation session felt different before anyone even spoke. Michael arrived early again, but this time he didn't try to make small talk or watch me walk into the room. He sat quietly with a folder in front of him, both hands resting on top like he was holding it steady. Jennifer came in a few minutes later, her expression guarded but calmer than before. The mediator greeted us and reviewed the structure for the day, updates on the paternity testing process, financial disclosures, and any new agreements that needed to be documented. Everything sounded routine. Until Michael slid a piece of paper across the table. "I wrote something," he said quietly. "My therapist suggested I read it here." The mediator nodded, giving him the floor. Michael unfolded the paper slowly. His voice wasn't dramatic or emotional, just steady, almost rehearsed. He talked about realizing how much of his identity had been tied to control. How learning about his infertility had shaken him more than he admitted. How he chased validation instead of facing his own fears. He didn't blame Jennifer. He didn't blame me. For the first time, he spoke only about his own choices. "I thought leaving was going to fix everything," he said. But I didn't understand what I was actually running from. The room stayed quiet while he finished reading. A year ago, hearing those words might have broken me open. Now, they felt distant. Honest, maybe. Necessary. But not something that changed my direction. When he finished, the mediator made copies for everyone's records. I nodded politely, acknowledging the effort it must have taken for him to say those things out loud. Then we moved on. Jennifer provided an update from her meeting with Edwin. The paternity testing process had officially started, and he had agreed to cooperate with co-parenting discussions if the results confirmed he was the father. She spoke clearly, sticking to facts, her voice stronger than it had been during previous sessions. For a moment, I noticed how different the energy felt compared to that chaotic anniversary party. No raised voices. No dramatic confrontations. Just structured conversations moving toward closure. The financial discussion came next. My forensic accountant's report had been submitted to both legal teams, outlining exactly where every dollar for the fitness center came from, my grandmother's inheritance, post-separation income, and business loans in my name alone. Seeing it laid out so clearly made Michael's earlier claims look smaller, almost hollow. His lawyer had sent over a new proposal, drastically reduced from the first one. Instead of trying to argue ownership, they suggested a small goodwill payment to finalize everything and avoid dragging the process out. I listened quietly while the mediator explained the terms. It wasn't about fairness anymore. It was about finishing the story. After a brief pause, I agreed to consider the offer. Jennifer watched the exchange silently, her hands folded together on the table. She didn't interrupt or react. Just listened, as if she was learning from the process as much as participating in it. When the session ended, Michael lingered for a moment like he wanted to say something else. But instead of approaching me directly, he nodded once and left the room without another word. Outside, James waited in the car with a takeaway coffee already sitting in the cup holder for me. He didn't ask what happened right away, just drove slowly while I explained the session piece by piece. He read a statement, I said finally. Took responsibility without asking for anything back. And how did that make you feel? James asked gently. I thought about it for a moment. Relieved, I admitted. Not because it changes anything. Just because it means we can finally close this chapter without more chaos. The next few days felt quieter than they had in months. Jennifer posted a short message online announcing a break from social media to focus on her health and pregnancy. The speculation faded quickly without new drama to fuel it. My fitness center's engagement returned to normal, workouts, nutrition tips, members celebrating personal milestones instead of gossip. That night, James and I sat at the kitchen table reviewing future plans for the business and the baby. We talked about slowing down wedding discussions until everything legal was fully finalized, not out of doubt, but out of respect for the process we were still moving through. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel rushed. But just when I thought the hardest parts were behind me, the mediator called with news that would shift the entire situation one more time. Because when the paternity results finally came back, they didn't just confirm the truth, they forced everyone to face what came next. The mediator's call came on a quiet Friday morning while I was reviewing class schedules at the fitness center. Her name lit up my phone screen, and for a moment I just stared at it, my stomach tightening. Even though I knew the paternity results were coming soon, part of me had hoped for a little more time before the next wave of reality arrived. I stepped into my office and closed the door before answering. The results are in, she said gently. I wanted to inform you privately before our next session. Her voice stayed calm, professional. The same tone she used whenever she delivered news that carried weight. Edwin had been confirmed as the biological father of Jennifer's baby with near total certainty. I sat back in my chair, letting the words settle. It wasn't shocking. We had all expected this outcome after Jennifer's admission. Still, hearing it officially confirmed felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Relief washed over me in a quiet, unexpected way. Not because the situation was anyone's victory, but because uncertainty was finally gone. The mediator explained that Edwin had already agreed to move forward with co-parenting discussions and had shown a willingness to keep things respectful and private. Jennifer would maintain primary custody once the baby arrived, while Edwin would be involved in shared decision-making. Everything sounded structured, organized, healthy, even. After the call ended, I sat at my desk for a few minutes just breathing. Outside my office, I could hear the familiar rhythm of weights clanking and trainers coaching clients through sets. Life was moving forward, steady and normal, despite everything happening behind the scenes. Later that afternoon, I received an email from my forensic accountant summarizing the final financial report. Every detail had been double-checked. Inheritance funds, renovation costs, business loans, and timelines that clearly showed the fitness center had been built entirely after my separation from Michael. Her message ended with a short line that made me smile. There is no reasonable claim here. You're protected. For the first time since that legal envelope arrived weeks earlier, I felt my shoulders relax completely. That evening, James and I sat on the couch reviewing the upcoming mediation agenda. He listened quietly while I explained the results, nodding thoughtfully. "So, this means things should start wrapping up soon?" he asked. "I think so," I said. "At least the biggest questions are answered now." He squeezed my hand gently, a silent reminder that whatever happened next, I wasn't facing it alone. The following mediation session felt different from the start. Jennifer walked in looking calmer, almost lighter, like the truth had taken some of the pressure off her shoulders. She confirmed that Edwin had been respectful throughout the process and was already discussing healthcare plans and future arrangements. Michael sat quietly, listening more than speaking. The edge that had once defined his presence seemed to be fading, replaced by something quieter, acceptance, maybe. When the mediator reviewed the paternity results aloud, no one reacted dramatically. There were no arguments, no raised voices. Just a shared understanding that the situation had finally moved from uncertainty into clarity. We shifted into financial discussions after that. Michael's lawyer presented a revised settlement proposal, significantly smaller than the earlier demands. Instead of arguing over ownership, they suggested a modest goodwill payment to finalize everything quickly and avoid further legal expenses. My lawyer reviewed the numbers carefully. Technically, I didn't have to agree. The evidence was overwhelmingly on my side. But dragging the process out for months would only create more stress, and stress was the last thing I needed right now. After a long pause, I nodded. "I'm willing to accept this if it means we all move forward," I said. The mediator documented the agreement while Michael signed preliminary paperwork without hesitation. Jennifer stayed quiet, watching the exchange like someone witnessing the final act of a long story. Walking out of the office that day felt surreal. No dramatic endings. No emotional speeches. Just the quiet realization that the chaos was finally settling into closure. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt the baby move, a small, steady reminder of the future growing beyond everything that had happened before. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what life might look like once all the legal battles were finished. I thought the hardest moments were behind me. I was wrong. Because 5 weeks before my due date, something happened at the fitness center that no amount of planning could have prepared me for. The first contraction didn't feel dramatic, just a sharp pull that made me grip the handlebars, and within minutes, everything changed. The morning started like any other. I arrived at the fitness center early, the sky still soft with dawn light filtering through the front windows. The early members-only spin class was always my favorite. Quieter, focused, filled with people who came not just to sweat but to reset their minds before the day began. My daughter's due date was still weeks away, so I moved carefully but confidently, adjusting bikes and greeting familiar faces as everyone settled in. Music filled the room, steady and rhythmic, and for a while I forgot about mediation sessions, legal paperwork, and everything else waiting outside those walls. About 15 minutes into the ride, a tight pressure rolled across my stomach. At first, I ignored it. Pregnancy came with all kinds of strange sensations, and I'd learned not to panic at every ache. I slowed my pedaling slightly, focusing on my breathing the way the prenatal instructor taught me. Then it happened again. Sharper this time. I gripped the handlebars, forcing a smile so the class wouldn't worry. One of my regular members, a nurse named Claire, noticed immediately. She hopped off her bike and walked over quietly. "You okay?" she asked under her breath. "I think so," I said, though my voice sounded distant even to me. 4 minutes later, another contraction hit, stronger than the last. Claire didn't hesitate. She signaled another trainer to take over the class and guided me gently toward my office. My heart raced, not just from the pain but from the sudden realization that this might be real. I called James. He answered on the first ring. "I think it's time," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm already on my way," he replied without hesitation. The staff moved quickly around me, grabbing my hospital bag from the storage room where we'd kept it just in case. Someone dimmed the lights in my office, another brought water, and Claire stayed beside me counting my breaths through each contraction. James arrived 12 minutes later, calm, focused, exactly like we'd practiced. He helped me to the car slowly, one arm steady at my back, making sure my seatbelt rested safely beneath my belly. The drive to the hospital blurred together. Contractions came closer, stronger, forcing me to close my eyes and breathe through the waves of pressure. James kept one hand on the wheel and the other lightly resting over mine, counting quietly the way we'd learned in class. By the time we reached the emergency entrance, the nurses were already waiting. They moved me into a room quickly, monitors blinking to life as they checked the baby's heartbeat. The steady rhythm filled the space, grounding me in a way nothing else could. "You're at 6 centimeters, the nurse said after a quick exam. "You've been working harder than you realized." Hours passed in a strange mix of focus and exhaustion. James never left my side. He whispered encouragement, held my hand, and counted every breath when contractions peaked. Nurses came and went, adjusting monitors, offering water, guiding me through position changes. At one point, the baby's heart rate dipped slightly, and the room shifted into quiet urgency. The doctor explained that a C-section might be necessary if things didn't progress soon. Fear flickered through me, sharp and cold, but I focused on the rhythm of my breathing, pushing when they told me to, trusting my body to keep going. Time stretched endlessly. And then, finally, after hours of effort, a cry filled the room. At 7:15 p.m., my daughter arrived. They placed her gently on my chest, her tiny fingers curling instinctively against my skin. The world narrowed to that single moment, her warmth, her breath, the quiet disbelief that she was finally here. I looked up and saw tears running down James's face as he watched her open her eyes for the first time. The nurses weighed her, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Perfectly healthy despite arriving early. They wrapped her in a soft blanket and guided us through the first moments of holding her together. Later, when the room finally quieted and James dozed in the chair beside me, I reached for my phone. Without overthinking it, I sent a simple message to Jennifer. "I hope your delivery goes smoothly when the time comes. Take care of yourself." She read it almost immediately. There was no reply. And strangely, that felt okay. Because as I watched my daughter sleep, I realized something important. The chaos of the past year had led me here, to a life that felt completely different from the one I thought I wanted. But even as I held her close, I knew the story wasn't finished yet. Because going home with a newborn would bring a new kind of challenge, one that had nothing to do with Michael, Jennifer, or any courtroom. And when we finally walked through our front door 2 days later, I realized the hardest part of rebuilding my life wasn't over, it was just beginning. Coming home with a newborn felt nothing like the movies. There were no balloons tied to the mailbox or neighbors waiting on the porch. Just quiet. The kind that settles into your bones after days of hospital beeping and whispered instructions. James carried the car seat inside carefully, like he was holding something made of glass, while I shuffled behind him, sore, exhausted, and overwhelmed in the strangest, gentlest way. Then I noticed the food. Containers stacked neatly along the porch wall. Labels taped to the lids. Soups, casseroles, salads, even a handwritten note taped to a loaf of bread that said, "Eat this one first, love, the 6 a.m. crew." My fitness center staff had organized a meal train without telling me. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at it all while my chest tightened. For months, I'd been so focused on surviving that I hadn't fully realized how many people had quietly stepped in to support me. Inside, I handed scheduling access to my assistant manager and sent a short message, 2 weeks. Handle everything. She replied almost instantly, already done. You rest. And for the first time since the legal letter arrived, I actually believed I could. The days blurred together in that newborn wave of feedings, short naps, learning how to swaddle without panicking. James moved through it all with calm efficiency, changing diapers like he'd been doing it for years and making sure I drank water even when I forgot. Michael didn't contact me. Not a text. Not an email. Nothing. I knew the final mediation session was still pending, but the silence felt intentional. Respectful, even. 3 weeks later, we had to attend one last meeting to finalize everything. I didn't want to leave my daughter, but closure doesn't wait for perfect timing. James stayed in the car with her while I walked into the mediator's office alone. Michael was already there. He looked different, not defeated, not hopeful. Just settled. Like someone who had finally stopped bracing for impact. The mediator reviewed the final paperwork calmly. The goodwill payment. The clause stating Michael had no claim to my business or future earnings. The agreement that all communication moving forward would go strictly through attorneys if needed. Michael signed each page without hesitation. When he handed the pen back, he looked up at me once. "I'm not going to interfere with your life anymore," he said quietly. "I hope you know that." I nodded. "I do." There was no apology. No attempt to reopen old wounds. And somehow, that made it easier. Jennifer wasn't there. She didn't need to be. Her situation had shifted onto a completely different track now, one that no longer intersected with mine. When I stepped back outside, James looked up immediately, searching my face for answers. "It's done," I said. He smiled, small, relieved, and reached for my hand. That night, after the baby finally fell asleep, I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone. I noticed Jennifer had posted a single photo. No caption, just a soft image of her hands resting on her stomach. The comments were full of speculation, but she didn't respond to any of them. I closed the app. Some stories don't need commentary. A few days later, my parents called asking to visit. I surprised myself by agreeing, but only after setting clear boundaries. 4 hours. No discussion of Michael or Jennifer. No advice. Just meeting their granddaughter. They followed every rule. When they left, my mother hugged me longer than usual. "You seem different," she said. "I am," I replied. And for once, that didn't feel like a defense. It felt like a fact. Life slowly found a rhythm again. I brought the baby to the fitness center during early morning sessions, using the quiet room for feedings. Members waved softly, careful not to wake her. The business ran smoothly without me micromanaging every detail. One evening, surrounded by tiny clothes and half-folded blankets, James sat down beside me on the floor. "Maybe next year," he said gently. "Or whenever it feels right." No ring. No pressure. Just an invitation to keep building. I leaned against him, listening to our daughter breathe in her sleep, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the fragile kind. The kind that comes from choosing yourself over and over again, even when it's hard. And as I turned off the light that night, I realized something important. Letting go didn't mean erasing the past. It meant finally closing the door, without slamming it, and walking forward with both hands free. And just when I thought the story had fully settled, a message arrived 3 months later that reminded me how far we'd all come, and how much life was still waiting ahead. 2 months passed faster than I expected. Newborn days blurred into each other. Quiet mornings, long nights, and a rhythm that felt both exhausting and strangely peaceful. My daughter grew stronger every week, her tiny fingers curling tighter around mine whenever she slept. The fitness center ran smoothly with my team handling most of the day-to-day work, and I checked in remotely while learning how to balance motherhood with the business I'd built from the ground up. For the first time in years, life didn't feel like a race. One afternoon, while rocking the baby in the quiet room at the fitness center, my phone buzzed with a message notification. Jennifer. Her name on the screen didn't trigger the old tension anymore. It just made me pause for a moment before opening it. A single photo filled the screen, a tiny newborn boy wrapped in a soft blue blanket. His eyes were closed, his expression peaceful in that way only new babies look. Underneath, her message read, "He's here." Everything went smoothly. Thank you for pushing mediation instead of court. We're not friends, but I don't think we're enemies either. I stared at the photo longer than I expected. There was no jealousy. No anger. Just a quiet understanding that we had both stepped into new lives shaped by choices neither of us could undo. I typed a short reply wishing her and the baby health, then set my phone aside without waiting for a response. Some connections didn't need long conversations to find closure. Later that day, I met James at home, and we sat on the floor surrounded by baby clothes and unopened gifts. He listened while I told him about Jennifer's message, nodding thoughtfully. "That's surprisingly mature," he said. "Yeah," I replied softly. "I think we're all just tired of fighting." He smiled at that, handing me a tiny pair of socks he'd been folding with careful precision. Meanwhile, life at the fitness center kept moving forward. My assistant manager updated me on new member signups, class schedules, and plans for a small community event. Hearing how smoothly everything ran without me hovering over every detail made me proud in a way I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just my fitness center anymore, it was a team effort. A few days later, I received another message. This one was from Michael. Unlike his earlier texts months ago, it was short and direct. "I heard you and the baby are doing well. I just wanted to say I'm glad things turned out okay. I won't reach out again unless it's necessary. Take care." I read it 3 times. There was no request to meet. No attempt to reopen old conversations. Just a quiet acknowledgement and a boundary that mirrored the one I had set long ago. For a moment, I felt a strange sense of gratitude, not for what happened between us, but for how it ended. I didn't reply. Closure didn't always require a final word. That evening, I took my daughter to the fitness center during an early members-only session. The familiar smell of rubber mats and protein shakes felt comforting, grounding me in the life I had built after everything fell apart. Members waved softly, careful not to wake her as I walked through the space. One woman whispered, "She's perfect," before returning to her workout without asking any personal questions. That respect meant more than she probably realized. After the session, James met us outside with coffee, leaning casually against his truck. He looked at our daughter sleeping peacefully and smiled in that quiet way that made everything feel steady. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" he asked. "All the time," I admitted. "But I don't wish for the old version of my life anymore." He nodded, like he understood exactly what I meant. That night, after putting the baby to bed, I sat alone for a few minutes reflecting on the messages from both Jennifer and Michael. 2 different paths. 2 different endings. Neither one defined me anymore. Because the strongest part of my story wasn't the drama or the heartbreak, it was the way everything slowly reshaped itself into something calmer, something real. And just when I thought life might finally stay predictable, a new opportunity at the fitness center began to take shape, one that would challenge me in a completely different way. Because the next chapter wasn't about the past at all, it was about deciding how big I was willing to let my new life become. The fitness center had always been loud, music echoing off the walls, weights clanging, trainers calling out encouragement, but that morning it felt different. Not chaotic, not overwhelming. Just alive. I arrived early with my daughter sleeping quietly in her carrier, the soft hum of treadmills already filling the air. Members smiled when they saw us, but no one crowded around or asked intrusive questions. That balance, support without pressure, meant more than I could explain. For the first time since opening, I wasn't rushing to fix everything myself. My team had stepped up in ways I never expected. Classes ran on time. New clients signed up without me personally handling every consultation. Even the social media accounts, once a constant source of stress, flowed smoothly with Myrtle's careful management. Standing near the front desk, I realized something surprising. The business didn't need me to carry it alone anymore. And instead of feeling replaced, I felt free. Later that afternoon, we held a staff meeting in the break room. The conversation wasn't about crisis management or legal drama for once. It was about growth. One of my trainers suggested adding specialized recovery sessions, another proposed expanding our prenatal fitness program after seeing how many members asked about my own pregnancy journey. I listened quietly, watching ideas bounce around the room. A year ago, I would have tried to control every decision. Now, I let the team lead, guiding instead of directing. The energy felt collaborative instead of heavy. After the meeting, Sophia stopped by with coffee, her usual sharp smile lighting up the doorway. "You've created something people want to be part of," she said, glancing around the fitness center floor. "Have you thought about expanding?" The question hung in the air longer than I expected. Expansion used to feel like the ultimate goal, proof that I'd succeeded despite everything that happened with Michael and Jennifer. But now, the idea made me pause. "I don't want this place to lose what makes it special," I said carefully. "Growth is good, but not if it turns into something cold and impersonal." Sophia nodded, clearly pleased with the answer. "Then maybe the next step isn't bigger," she said. "Maybe it's deeper." That thought stayed with me long after she left. That evening, James and I sat at the kitchen table reviewing fitness center finances while the baby slept nearby. The numbers looked strong. Steady memberships, consistent profit, and enough savings to support future projects if I chose to pursue them. "You don't have to prove anything anymore," James said quietly. I looked up from the laptop. "I know. That's the weird part. For so long, my motivation had been tied to rebuilding after Michael left, to proving I could stand on my own after everything with Jennifer fell apart. Now that those chapters were truly closed, I had to decide what came next. Not out of revenge or survival, but out of genuine desire. The next morning, I experimented with a slower routine at the fitness center. Instead of jumping into every class, I spent time connecting with members, asking about their goals, listening to their stories, watching how the space brought people together beyond workouts. One member told me she joined because the environment felt safe. Another said it was the first fitness center where she didn't feel judged. Those words mattered more than any profit report. In the afternoon, I sat in my office reviewing new program ideas. Prenatal strength classes. Postpartum recovery workshops. Community events focused on mental health as much as fitness. The vision felt different from before, less about competition, more about building something sustainable. My phone buzzed briefly with a notification. A news article mentioned Michael starting a technical training program, focusing on a completely different career path. Jennifer had also returned to social media slowly, posting simple updates about motherhood without drama or controversy. I read the headlines without feeling pulled back into their lives. Their stories were no longer intertwined with mine. And that realization felt powerful. As the day ended, I stood alone in the empty fitness center, watching the sunset reflect off the mirrors I used to clean during my first weeks there. The space looked the same, but I wasn't. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I was building something intentional. Something calm. Something real. And just as I locked the doors for the night, a new idea formed, one that would test whether I was ready to step fully into this next version of myself. Because the next step wasn't about expanding the fitness center. It was about deciding who I wanted to become now that the past finally stopped defining me. When my parents called asking to visit, I didn't answer right away. Their name on my screen still carried old weight, years of expectations, comparisons, and conversations that always seemed to circle back to Michael and Jennifer. A year ago, I would have picked up instantly, hoping for approval I never quite received. This time, I let the phone ring. Later that evening, I listened to the voicemail while sitting on the couch with my daughter sleeping against my chest. My mom's voice sounded softer than usual, almost cautious. "We'd like to meet the baby," she said. "Whenever you're ready." No commentary. No pressure. Just a request. I thought about it for a long time before calling back. "Yes," I said finally. "But there are rules." There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. For hours, I continued. No talk about Michael or Jennifer. No advice unless I ask for it. "This visit is about meeting your granddaughter, nothing else." My mom agreed quicker than I expected. The day they arrived, I felt a quiet tension in my shoulders as I straightened the living room, adjusting blankets and clearing space on the couch. James stayed nearby but gave us room, stepping into the kitchen when the doorbell rang. My dad smiled first when he saw the baby, his expression softening in a way I hadn't seen in years. My mom followed slowly, her eyes scanning the room before settling on me. "You look happy," she said carefully. "I am," I replied, surprising myself with how easy the words felt. They held the baby gently, taking turns rocking her while asking simple questions about sleep schedules and feeding routines. For once, the conversation stayed light, no comparisons, no subtle comments about my past relationship, no mention of Michael's choices or Jennifer's life. Just presence. At one point, my mom glanced around the room, noticing photos from the fitness center events and the quiet evidence of the life I had built. "You've done well for yourself," she said softly. The acknowledgement felt different this time. Not like approval I needed to chase, just an observation. We talked about small things. My dad's new camera hobby. My mom's knitting projects. James joined us briefly, exchanging polite conversation before stepping back again. And then, just like that, the 4 hours were over. They stood up without hesitation, gathering their coats as if they respected the boundary I had set without needing reminders. At the door, my mom hesitated. "I know things haven't always been easy," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But we're proud of you." I nodded, not trusting myself to respond right away. After they left, the apartment felt unusually quiet. James walked back into the living room, raising an eyebrow. "That went better than expected." I laughed softly. It did. For the first time, I realized something important: boundaries didn't push people away when they were built from self-respect. They created space for healthier connections to grow. Later that evening, I took my daughter for a short walk around the neighborhood. The air felt crisp, the streets calm. As I passed familiar storefronts, I noticed how little my thoughts drifted toward the past. Michael's name barely crossed my mind anymore. Jennifer's story felt distant, like something I had once witnessed but no longer lived inside. Back home, James and I sat on the floor folding tiny baby clothes, the soft hum of music filling the background. "You handled today really well," he said quietly. I didn't feel like I was trying to prove anything, I replied. That's new. He nodded, handing me a small sweater. You've changed. In a good way. I smiled, realizing he was right. The strongest part of my growth wasn't opening the fitness center or surviving the legal battles, it was learning how to stand calmly in situations that once would have shaken me completely. As I tucked my daughter into her crib that night, I felt a steady sense of clarity settle over me. Life wasn't perfect. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic anymore either. It was balanced. And just when I thought things might stay this peaceful, James brought up a conversation that would shift the way I thought about our future together. Because later that night, surrounded by baby blankets and half-folded laundry, he asked a question that didn't come with pressure, just possibility. The apartment was quiet except for the soft rustle of fabric as James and I sorted through a mountain of baby clothes spread across the living room floor. Some outfits were gifts from fitness center members. Others came from friends who had quietly supported me through the chaos of the past year. Tiny socks, pastel blankets, little onesies with motivational quotes printed across the front, reminders of how many people had shown up for me when I needed it most. Our daughter slept peacefully in her crib nearby, the baby monitor casting a faint glow across the room. James folded another shirt carefully before glancing up at me. You ever think about what comes next? He asked. I smiled faintly. That depends. Are we talking about sleep schedules or life plans? He laughed softly, leaning back against the couch. Both, maybe. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Not heavy like the ones I used to share with Michael during the final months of our marriage. This quiet felt intentional, like space we chose instead of avoided. Finally, James cleared his throat. I don't want to rush you, he said slowly. But I've been thinking about us, about the wedding we started planning before everything got complicated. I set the tiny sweater in my hands aside and looked at him fully. There was no pressure in his eyes. No expectation that I would give him a definitive answer right away. I don't want people to see me as a replacement for Michael, he continued. I want us to build something that stands on its own, at our pace. His honesty surprised me in the best way. A year ago, conversations about commitment felt tangled in expectations and comparisons, especially with Jennifer's presence constantly shadowing everything. Now, the words felt lighter, grounded in reality instead of urgency. I don't want to rush either, I admitted. The last year changed so much. I want our next step to feel intentional. Not like we're trying to prove anything to anyone. James nodded, relief softening his expression. Then we take our time, he said simply. That was it. No dramatic declarations. No elaborate plans. Just a quiet agreement built on respect instead of pressure. Later that evening, after putting the baby down for the night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Images from the early fitness center days, snapshots of classes packed with members cheering each other on, even a few candid pictures from before my life turned upside down. Michael appeared in some of the older photos, a reminder of a life that felt distant now. Jennifer's presence lingered in a few memories too, but the emotional charge was gone. I didn't feel bitterness when I looked at them. Just distance. Closing the photo app, I realized how much my perspective had shifted. My story wasn't defined by what Michael had done or by Jennifer's choices anymore. Those chapters existed, but they didn't carry the same weight. The next morning at the fitness center, I walked through the doors feeling lighter than usual. Members greeted me warmly, some waving quietly at the baby sleeping in her carrier. A new trainer approached me with an idea for a postpartum recovery program, inspired by watching my own journey. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by another project, I felt excited, like growth no longer meant escaping the past, but expanding into the future. During a break, Sophia stopped by again, sipping her coffee as she watched the morning crowd move through their workouts. "You've found your balance," she said thoughtfully. "I think I'm finally starting to," I replied. She smiled knowingly. The strongest businesses come from people who stop chasing validation and start building from purpose. Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, James and I sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker on one by one. The air felt calm, carrying none of the tension that once defined my evenings. "I like this version of us," he said quietly. "So do I," I replied. Because for the first time, the future didn't feel like something I needed to fix or prove. It felt like something I could grow into slowly. And just when I thought I understood exactly who I had become, a quiet moment of reflection would make me realize the biggest lesson of the entire journey. Because looking back at everything that happened with Michael and Jennifer, I finally saw the truth. The strongest part of my story wasn't survival, it was transformation. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after everything settled, but it became calm. And calm felt like a miracle. The fitness center reached a rhythm I had once only imagined. Membership numbers stayed steady, classes ran smoothly, and the atmosphere shifted from survival mode into something stronger, community. Every morning, I walked through the doors carrying my daughter, greeted by familiar smiles and a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with the chaos of the past. There were still reminders of where I'd come from. Sometimes a member would mention seeing Michael around town starting his new training program. Other times, Jennifer's name would pop up online when she posted quiet updates about motherhood. But those moments no longer stirred the heavy emotions they once did. Their lives were moving forward on their own paths. And so was mine. One afternoon, I sat in my office reviewing long-term plans for the fitness center. Instead of chasing rapid expansion, I focused on sustainability, limiting memberships to maintain a supportive environment, investing in new programs that prioritized mental health alongside physical fitness. It felt different from the ambition that once drove me. Before, I had been building something to prove I could survive after Michael left, to show Jennifer, and maybe even my family, that I wasn't the person they underestimated. Now, I was building something because I genuinely loved it. That shift changed everything. James noticed the difference too. "You don't rush through things anymore," he said one evening while we cleaned up after dinner. "You actually stop and enjoy where you are." I thought about that for a moment. I used to feel like I had to outrun the past, I admitted. Now it just feels like part of the story. Later that week, the fitness center hosted a small staff appreciation dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant nearby. All 12 of my employees showed up, laughing loudly, sharing stories about clients and classes. Watching them interact reminded me how much the business had grown beyond just me. At one point, someone asked if I planned to expand into a second location. A year ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Now, I shook my head gently. Not yet. I'd rather keep this place feeling personal than turn it into something huge and disconnected. The team agreed immediately. That moment made me realize how aligned we had become, not chasing endless growth, but choosing intentional success. When I got home that night, my daughter slept peacefully in her crib while James sat beside me on the couch. We talked about everything except the past, future vacations, new programs at the fitness center, small plans that felt real and achievable. Michael hadn't reached out since the final mediation session. Jennifer continued sharing quiet glimpses of her life online, but the drama that once surrounded her had faded into the background. The silence from both of them didn't feel empty. It felt respectful. One quiet morning, I took a walk through the empty fitness center before opening hours. The sunlight reflected off the mirrors I used to clean when I first started working there. A reminder of how far I had come from those early days of heartbreak and uncertainty. I paused near the weight rack, remembering the version of myself who once stood there trying to lift away pain she didn't know how to process. That woman felt distant now. Stronger, but softer too. I realized something then: revenge had never been the real ending to my story. Growth was. Because the biggest victory wasn't watching Michael regret his choices or seeing Jennifer's life change. It was waking up every day without carrying resentment. That evening, as I rocked my daughter to sleep, I thought about everything that had happened: the betrayal, the loss, the rebuilding, the unexpected friendships, the quiet moments that slowly reshaped who I was. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next chapter to begin. I was already living it. And just when I thought the story had reached its natural ending, one final realization settled in. The kind that changes how you see your entire journey. Because the most surprising part of this whole experience wasn't losing Michael or watching Jennifer move on, it was discovering who I became when I finally stopped trying to hold on to what was never meant to stay. There was a time when I believed my life had a clear direction. Marriage. A shared future. A version of happiness I thought I understood. When everything fell apart with Michael and Jennifer, I assumed the story had ended. That the best parts of my life had already passed and I was left standing in the aftermath. But sitting in the quiet of my living room now, my daughter asleep against my shoulder and the soft glow of the evening light filling the space, I realized how wrong that belief had been. Nothing had ended. It had only shifted. The fitness center had grown into something bigger than a business. It became a place where people felt safe to start over, not just physically, but emotionally. Every time a new member walked through the doors nervous and unsure, I saw pieces of my old self in them. And every time they stayed, grew stronger, and smiled a little more easily, it reminded me that transformation isn't loud. It happens slowly, quietly, one small decision at a time. Michael's absence from my life no longer felt like a loss. It felt like space. Space that allowed me to build something real without constantly proving my worth. The last message he sent months ago still sat buried in my phone, respectful, distant, final. I never felt the need to reread it. Jennifer's life moved forward too. She shared glimpses of motherhood online, less polished than before, more genuine. I watched from a distance without judgment, understanding that we had both walked through storms that reshaped us in ways no one else could fully see. We weren't friends. But we weren't trapped in the past either. One morning, I arrived at the fitness center before sunrise, unlocking the doors while the city still felt half asleep. The mirrors reflected a version of me I barely recognized compared to the woman who first walked in holding a mop, trying to outrun heartbreak. Stronger posture. Softer eyes. Peace. I moved through the space slowly, adjusting equipment and straightening towels out of habit. The quiet gave me time to think, not about what I had lost, but about everything I had gained. A supportive team. A daughter who laughed easily. A relationship with James that felt grounded instead of rushed. That evening, after closing, we sat on the balcony watching the lights flicker across the skyline. James reached for my hand, his touch steady and familiar. "You ever miss the old version of your life?" he asked gently. I thought about the question longer than I expected. I miss the person I thought I was going to be, I admitted. But I don't miss the way I felt back then. He nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. Because the truth was simple, losing Michael didn't destroy my future. It forced me to build one that actually belonged to me. Later that night, I opened my journal and wrote something I hadn't fully said out loud before. The strongest part of my story wasn't revenge or success. It was learning how to let go without losing myself. Those words stayed with me as I watched my daughter sleep, her tiny breaths steady and calm. I used to think closure meant dramatic moments, big speeches, perfect endings, final victories. But real closure felt quieter than that. It looked like waking up without resentment. Like building relationships that didn't feel fragile. Like realizing that Jennifer and Michael were chapters in my life, important ones, yes, but not the entire story. And maybe that was the biggest twist of all. Because the woman who once begged for love and validation didn't disappear overnight. She changed slowly, through heartbreak, through rebuilding, through choosing herself again and again until it became natural. As I turned off the lights and carried my daughter to bed, a sense of calm settled over me. Not the kind that comes from everything being perfect. The kind that comes from knowing you survived, grew, and found something stronger than the life you thought you wanted. And if there's one thing I learned through all of it, it's this. Sometimes the moment your life breaks open isn't the ending you fear, it's the beginning you never expected. Because the betrayal story was never about losing Michael or moving past Jennifer, it was about discovering the version of myself that only existed on the other side of letting go. A year ago, I thought closure would feel dramatic. I imagined a final conversation with Michael that wrapped everything up neatly. An apology that erased the hurt, a moment where everyone finally understood my side of the story. I thought moving on meant reaching some big emotional finish line. But standing in the fitness center early one morning, watching sunlight spill across the floor before anyone else arrived, I realized closure didn't look like that at all. It looked ordinary. Peaceful. Quiet. The early hours had become my favorite part of the day. I would unlock the doors, set up the equipment, and take a few minutes to sit alone before the rush began. My daughter slept in her carrier near the front desk, her soft breathing filling the stillness. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused, remembering the woman who once stood there trying to outrun heartbreak. Back then, every decision felt fueled by survival. Proving I could rebuild after Michael left, proving I could stand strong despite everything that happened with Jennifer. Now, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I was choosing. Choosing slower mornings. Choosing work that felt meaningful instead of urgent. Choosing relationships built on calm rather than chaos. That shift changed the way I saw everything. Later that afternoon, a new client approached me after class. She hesitated before speaking, clearly nervous. "I joined because of your story," she said softly. "I went through something similar, and seeing how you rebuilt your life gave me hope." Her words caught me off guard. For a long time, I had thought of my journey as something private, a series of hard lessons I needed to survive quietly. Hearing someone else find strength in it reminded me that healing doesn't just belong to one person. It ripples outward. That evening, James and I walked through the neighborhood pushing the stroller slowly, the air cool and steady. He glanced at me with that familiar thoughtful expression. "You don't carry the same weight anymore," he said. I smiled slightly. "I think I finally stopped measuring my life against the past." He nodded, like he understood exactly what I meant. Michael and Jennifer still existed in the same city, living their own lives. Sometimes I heard updates through mutual acquaintances. Small pieces of news that would have once pulled me back into old emotions. Now, they felt distant. Not erased. Just finished. One night, while organizing old files on my laptop, I came across a folder filled with photos from years earlier. Vacations, family gatherings, fitness center openings, moments from a life that felt almost unfamiliar. I paused on a picture of myself standing beside Michael at a party, smiling in a way that looked confident but tired at the same time. For a moment, I felt compassion for that version of me. She had tried so hard to hold everything together. Closing the folder, I realized something important. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting who I used to be. It meant understanding why I had needed to grow beyond that version of myself. The next morning at the fitness center, my team surprised me with a small celebration. Nothing elaborate, just coffee, pastries, and a handwritten card thanking me for creating a space where people felt seen. Reading their messages, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. This place had started as an escape from heartbreak. Now it was a foundation for something bigger than my own story. That night, as I rocked my daughter to sleep, I thought about the question people asked me most often: do you ever regret how things turned out? The answer felt clearer than ever. No. Because without losing Michael, I might never have discovered how strong I could become on my own. Without the complicated history with Jennifer, I might never have learned the value of boundaries, or the peace that comes from letting go without bitterness. And without those painful chapters, I might never have built a life that felt truly mine. As I turned off the lights and stepped quietly into the hallway, I felt a deep sense of calm settle over me. Not the fragile calm that comes from avoiding problems. The steady kind that grows when you finally trust yourself to move forward. Maybe this wasn't the ending people expected. No dramatic revenge. No perfect fairy tale resolution. Just a woman who rebuilt her life piece by piece until it felt stronger than the one she lost. And as I closed the bedroom door softly behind me, I realized something else. The story didn't need a grand finale. Because the real victory wasn't what happened to Michael or Jennifer. It was the life I chose to keep building long after their chapter ended. And the funniest part? The version of happiness I once begged for looks nothing like the quiet, powerful life I created when I finally stopped chasing it. There wasn't a single moment where everything suddenly felt finished. No dramatic realization. No final conversation that tied the story into a perfect ending. Instead, closure arrived quietly, in small, ordinary moments that slowly replaced the chaos that once defined my days. One morning, while opening the fitness center before sunrise, I caught myself smiling for no reason at all. A year earlier, mornings had felt heavy. Every step forward carried the weight of what happened with Michael and Jennifer, the betrayal, the confusion, the constant need to prove I was okay. Now, I moved through the space calmly, setting out equipment and adjusting lights without that pressure sitting on my shoulders. My daughter slept peacefully in her carrier near the front desk, and the familiar rhythm of the fitness center felt grounding instead of overwhelming. I realized then that I wasn't rebuilding anymore. I was living. Later that day, a new member approached me after class. She looked nervous, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "I've been following your journey," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say, you make starting over look possible." Her words stayed with me long after she left. For so long, I thought my story was defined by loss, losing a marriage, losing the life I thought I was building, losing trust in people I loved. But standing there in the middle of a room filled with people chasing their own growth, I understood something different. My story wasn't about what ended. It was about what began afterward. That evening, James and I sat on the couch watching our daughter kick her tiny legs in the air, her laughter filling the room. The sound felt like a reset button, a reminder that life didn't have to be complicated to be meaningful. "You've changed," he said softly. "I hope in a good way," I replied with a small laugh. "In the best way," he said. "You're not trying to outrun anything anymore." He was right. I used to fill every moment with plans. Expanding the fitness center faster, pushing myself harder, proving I could rise above everything that happened with Michael and Jennifer. Now, I found comfort in slower decisions. Intentional choices. Not because I had lost ambition. Because I finally understood the difference between growth and escape. A few days later, while organizing old emails, I stumbled across messages from the early days after the separation. Reading them felt surreal, like looking into the life of someone else. The version of me who wrote those messages sounded uncertain, fragile, constantly searching for reassurance. I closed the folder gently. Not out of avoidance, but out of acceptance. That chapter didn't need to be revisited anymore. Michael's name rarely crossed my mind now. When it did, it felt neutral, almost distant, like remembering an old job rather than a former life. Jennifer's presence online had softened too, her posts quieter, more grounded in motherhood than image. We had all moved forward in different ways. And that was okay. One afternoon, the fitness center hosted a small community event, nothing flashy, just a chance for members to connect outside their usual workouts. Watching people laugh, share stories, and support one another reminded me why I started this journey in the first place. Not to compete. Not to prove anything. but to create a space where people felt safe becoming stronger, physically and emotionally. As the event wound down, I stood near the mirrors I used to clean during my first weeks there, remembering how lost I felt back then. The woman holding a mop, trying to keep herself together after everything fell apart, felt like a distant version of me now. And yet, she was still part of this story. Because without her, I wouldn't have learned how to rebuild. That night, after putting my daughter to bed, I stepped onto the balcony and looked out at the city lights. The air felt calm, carrying none of the tension that once filled my evenings. For the first time, I didn't wonder what could have been if Michael had stayed or if Jennifer had chosen differently. Those questions no longer mattered. What mattered was the life I had built, steady, imperfect, real. I leaned against the railing, letting the quiet settle around me, and realized something unexpected. The strongest version of myself wasn't the one who fought the hardest or proved everyone wrong. It was the one who learned how to let go without losing her kindness. And as I turned back inside, closing the door softly behind me, I knew this wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a life that finally felt like my own, not shaped by the past, but guided by everything I had learned from it.